But because thou art compassionate, purify me by the compassion of thy mercy.
Hello, Antiochian men in the Diocese of Miami in the Southeast. This is Michael Baclig with another interview in our Amen interview series. We have with us today another special guest. Today we are joined by Father Kosta Petrogeorge, an Orthodox priest and a licensed psychotherapist. Father Kosta, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Michael, and good morning, Antiochian men.
Father, you have been an ordained priest since 1990, and I understand that about 10 years ago, with the blessing of your hierarch, who at the time was Metropolitan Maximus of Pittsburgh, you became a licensed marriage and family therapist. You eventually went on to gain certification in treating sexual addiction, as well as in treating betrayal trauma. I was hoping you would share with us how this all came about. Can you share something about your calling to the priesthood and what subsequently influenced you to eventually offer full-time psychotherapy as you are doing now?
Of course, Michael, over the years, my sons grew up hearing a lot of people ask me how I became a priest and so forth. And I found myself at one point thinking, wait a minute, it's not just one event, it's a whole bunch of things. So right now I'm going to try to offer some things that they have never heard before in case they're listening, and hopefully they will be. But I appreciate the question. I'm always glad to share how the Holy Spirit and the Lord are working in my journey, Michael. I'm going to pick a couple of very early memories to share. One is when I was a very young boy. I was so young back in the day when there were really no seatbelts in cars. I'm 61 years old now, but I'm going back to where my brothers and sisters, we were all kind of crammed in the back seat. I think there were a couple of visitors. Our family was on a journey, a trip, a vacation to Tijuana, Mexico. And I remember being told that there's a lot of poverty. You're going to see people, they live in cardboard boxes. And visitors and tourists would go there to bargain down and get things for very cheap. And indeed, it was mind blowing to see, you know, the streets and the neighborhoods outside the markets where people and houses just simply were impoverished greatly. And my mother said something. It's the only thing I remember about the exchanges. But there I was in the back seat of the car, crammed in with my brothers and sisters. And I remember my mother simply saying this. And I'm not sure, God knows her full intentions, but I think it was prophetic because it got me thinking. You know, we were looking at the poverty, the grime, the difficulty of the street life and the way people lived in those neighborhoods. And she simply said, my mother obviously is a Greek woman, and what she said was, why don't they at least get a broom and sweep around their porch area by the door? Why don't they at least sweep it out and clean it? And I took it as even as a little kid, as a real existential question. Why is this happening? Why don't they improve themselves? What's going on? Where are they? And it really kind of, I think that's probably a really existential experience I can remember where I was like prompted to say, why is this? How should we relate to that? What should we do about that? The why question was important. And of course, later in life, I learned that the why question is a good question. The Lord asked, why? Why do you call me good? In the Psalms, why do the heathen rage? Why are things the way they are? And I think that was a big tip off for me to kind of just begin the question of, and that's the question of theology. That's the question of psychology. Why do people act the way they are? Why are things the way they are? And there is a second memory too from childhood that I'll kind of add before I pause there, is that when I was, again, a young man, not quite as young, I think I was probably in middle school, my father owned a restaurant and bar, and he put me in charge of something that was, fun for me. He'd give me the money bags, and he would have me walk to the bank and make the transaction to the banker. And as a young man, I thought that was pretty cool. He's trusting me with these money bags. And I was, but in passing from his establishment to the bank on the way back then, there was very near on the way, a few blocks away, there was an X-rated movie theater. And there probably were not a lot of them back then, but there was one then. And I remember as a little kid knowing nothing about it, but just being very curious about it. And I remember my parents actually talking about this place once, just not in disgust, but in the curiosity. What I remember from them was saying, sort of with a nod of head, those people who own that, they're from the church. They're Greek people, and I don't know why. And they were kind of curious about, but that was the only discussion we had. But I remember outside there was a picture of a seductive woman, kind of one of those half pictures, half illustrations. And I remember thinking to myself as a young man, not daring to kind of stare or be overt, but thinking to myself, in the poster, I still remember the name. You're gonna think I'm crazy, but there's an extra reason why I remember the name of the porn actress. And you said, why does Father Kosta remember her name? Well, I'll tell you in a second. But her name was Linda Lovelace. And when I was a little kid, I remember that name just popped out in my mind, Linda Lovelace, Deep Throat, which I later learned was a very popular X-rated movie. But I remember just barely kind of looking over and daring to look as a little kid, thinking I'm not supposed to look at it. Just instinctively knew, I don't know. But I remember thinking one day, getting a glimpse and thinking, why is she there? Who is that? Who does that? Why is, how does she do that? How do people get her to do that? Or how does she do that? Or why does she do that? And it had another question built into it. What about the people in the movie theater? Who are they? Where they're? I'm sure I was early high school or middle school, but somehow I was prompted to ask those rather, again, kind of existential questions, if you will, that I didn't have answers for. It just led me thinking. And the interesting thing about that story, Michael, is that much later in life, when I was doing a master's program in counseling psychology, I came across that name again, Linda Lovelace. How so? Well, frankly, I was studying marriage and family therapy, but my favorite courses that set a whole new kind of running excitement in studies for me was my courses that I took in the subject of trauma. I had a wonderful professor, and in this course we were studying trauma and sexual trauma and incest and just really terrible, hard things. And there was some wonderful books that I ran across. One of them was by a writer named Judith Herman on trauma. And she had this term, which I never really think I heard of before. It was called trauma bondage. And she was talking about such things as problematic sexual realities and entanglements. And she made this reference to Linda Lovelace. There she is, and immediately, Linda Lovelace. And she went on to explain about that this woman apparently was coerced and forced. I don't know how much that's true. I never researched it much, but I did look it up once, much later, actually not so long ago, on apparently it's true. She claims, at least later in life, that she was actually forced and coerced by her boyfriend or whatever. So, but it led me to a question. It led me to rethink those questions. And I began to get answers as to why people do that. It's not just a mystery. Why do people, if I said to a person, even a woman, to say, we want you to go out on stage, take your clothes off, dance around, do these, this and that. Who would do that? Who would do that?
Yeah.
Who would claim that they'll do that? But people do that. What makes them do that? How do we get from this point to that point? And as a matter of fact, people who study these things come up with really interesting but insightful dynamics of psychology, that there is such a thing as trauma bondage, but we accept it and we get entangled in it.
Yeah, Father, I appreciate you sharing those stories from those early memories of yours. It's really amazing to me how we can be so impacted by the smallest things as children, and as we develop, that becomes a bigger part of our lives. And in the past, Father, I know and I understand there have been from among the clergy voices of caution about the practice of psychology. So I was wondering if that has changed. And from your unique experience, could you share some of your thoughts about the relationship between theology and psychology?
Absolutely. In some ways, I think that it has changed. Let me just back up a notch to indicate why I think it's changed. I remember when I was first ordained a priest, I was at a certain clergy conference where there was a clergy psychologist named Father Charles Ioannidis, who was kind of a not so often seen, a priest who was a psychologist and had a, but he was explaining the statistics about how marriages were moving from, it was like a 50% divorce rate, and people were really some of the clergy were uncomfortable even imagining that, and we're hearing it from a psychologist, and what kind of things are you getting into? And it was actually just this defense that I was not, that I was just observing at the time. There's a reason why people have defenses at times, and maybe there's good reasons why they have defenses, but I think that's changing for a lot of reasons. So allow me to just back up a moment. I remember when I was first ordained a priest, and again, the explosion of psychology and the insight was not so known to me anyway, and many other people the way it is now. But I remember the first time I was with as an ordained priest, I was at a young adult conference, and there was a young way, and I was hearing confessions while there was some talks going on. And one of the young women, college age woman, came to me, and she was explaining to me that when she eats, she induces vomit, and she was really looking for help. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know. I don't remember what I told her. Hopefully it was something good. I knew at least that the body is good and that she shouldn't be doing that. But I didn't scold her. I did something, but I never knew what she was talking about then. Now I know that she was referring to bulimia, an eating disorder where she was referring to this, that I couldn't know as much about it then, but boy, did I want to know about it. And now I know what that is, and I know what some of the reasons for it are and where that comes from. Or just one other quick anecdote. When again, early on in my ministry, I'm sure I was, first 1 or 2 years, and I was at a youth camp where there were a lot of teenagers there. And as I was hearing confessions, this one day, I still remember this well, because some things you just don't forget. There was a teenage girl who, she waited to see me, and she was the last one to see me. And as we were talking, she was agonizing over her relationship with her parents and whatnot. And she rolled up her shirt sleeve, and she showed me this. She said, "Look, my parents haven't even noticed." And she showed me the slits on her arms. And I was like, trying to make sense of it myself. We're talking about self-harm. Well, what we're talking about there is self-cutting. It's not an infrequent thing. It's not but back then, what did I know about self-cutting? What did anybody know about self-cutting back then? Some people did, but not like today.
Yeah.
So today we have these things, and now it's people actually hurt themselves, cut themselves, things. And so what does a priest in a parish do today when a person comes and says, I have this issue, if they discover it, if they find it, if the person is sharing that with them? So I think priests naturally want support in knowing about it themselves, and also in knowing where they can find support, to have the time, and people have listening skills to know how to do that as well. So I think in my examples of where I've lived and where I live at now, is I've recently moved to North Carolina, the clergy are entirely receptive and interested in whatever support or thinking out that I can give them. So it is a caution, a good caution, to be discernful about what to do with people, and how to think of the life and the path and the insights of psychology. It requires a discernment. Discernment means diakrisis. We hear the word devil in there, right? The Greek word for devil is diabolos.
Yeah.
Diabolos, diabolical. We hear in Batman. It comes from the word diabolos, is the devil who divides and breaks, but he divides to kill us. But we divide. We use the word diakrisis. It's a virtue to cultivate, because in the divine liturgy, we pray for discernment. The priest prays for discernment for the people, to have good discernment. We seek this as a a virtue to cultivate. So all priests are interested in learning about psychology. I was interested in I learned about psychology long before I was a licensed professional therapist. It's just something we all want to learn. We don't have that great before I pause, I'll give you one quick anecdote on that. When I was at the seminary, Michael, and asked you a question, how has that changed? I don't know, the awareness of the attributes or the insights of the best psychology are profound. And really, there again, the interplay between theology and psychology is amazing. I mean, we the priests read every divine liturgy. We're quoting Psalm 50, and King David, talks in his repentance, talks about in sins my mother conceived me.
Yeah.
Sounds like family of origin to me. But here's a quick anecdote. When I was in the seminary, I was reading the book Unseen Warfare by Saint Theophan the Recluse, I recall, and he has this section. I really need to go back to that and expand. He has an entire section on navigating the struggle of lust in his day. Imagine how, but it's so profound. And one of the exact recipes that he gives, he talks about how he says that a man could look at, let's say, a loose woman or a harlot, and he looks at her, and what happens is he starts to despise her and starts to think just how awful she is. And our saint Theophan says, he says, be careful of that, because what you're doing, perhaps, is you're looking at her in despise, but in doing that, you're actually exploiting her. And you despise her, but yet you're looking, and you're getting tempted yourself as you're despising, you're getting tempted, and it's a cycle. And Saint Theophan says, be careful of that. Don't go in and start exploiting that. Don't have that kind of an attitude. I thought is that theology or is that psychology? It's both, of course.
Sounds like both for sure. Yeah, Father, that makes a lot of sense. I was hoping that you could share how you draw from your experience in theology and or psychology to respond to real life difficult situations where people come to you overwhelmed and in pain. You mentioned earlier about somebody that cuts themselves. What would you say to someone who is self-harming like that? And how often does that happen? And practically, what would you say or do?
Yeah, sure. So sharing a little bit from my experience on a very, as practical and helpful as I can think of, we'll just start with the theme of cutting that you asked, Michael. And if there's time, we can go to a couple more as well. But does that happen? It surely does happen a lot. It surely does happen. It's and let me just begin by the question: if somebody comes to you and somehow they're self-harming, there's a lot of different types of self-harming. Cutting is one of them. But people might pick at their skin or rub their skin, or now some of the activities or behaviors that we think of as addictions, well, it's self-harm. I'm putting harmful things in my body, and letting my mind get hijacked, and I'm really harming myself. These broadly thought of. But when I'm actually taking my body and picking at it or hurting it or pulling at it or cutting it, which is probably the most common, first, before saying anything about that, what do we do about that, first of all? I would just suggest it would actually be a great kind of brainstorming thing if people were live. But first thing I want to do is, wait a minute, Michael, what's the first thing you do? Somebody comes to you and says, I'm cutting. Can you help me out? I'm thinking. You discover you discover it somehow. And what's the first thing you do? Any guesses or thoughts, Michael, if I could put you on the spot?
I think maybe I would try to understand why they're doing it, to try to find a way to help them to see that it's not good for them.
Yeah, thank you. And that's from your compassion and you want to know, wait a minute, why this, so that we can do this. And this is why we're talking about it. Yeah. I definitely want to know why they're doing it. I definitely want to know the story behind that. Mm-hmm. Because if I know the story behind that, as you're suggesting, Michael, very often it can actually help the shame go away. It's like, oh, no wonder I did it. By the way, why do people do anything? Why do people not pick up the broom in Tijuana, Mexico, for that matter? Why do people turn to drugs, turn to sex, turn to gambling? And maybe it's because they're really trying to meet a basic need that is not met, called attachment, their basic affirmation. They need to do something here. And so learning why we do what we do and how we turn and what supports that can really be de-shaming. However, I would suggest that we don't want to start with that. We don't want to start with that because the first thing we do want to start with, well, the reason I don't ask a person why you did that, why did you do that? What's up? Well, why do you do that? My premise is, first of all, they probably don't know. and and even if they do know, if a person is in that state, the serotonin levels, the chemistry in their body, they're probably really, it's simpler to suicide. I'm thinking of harming myself. Or thinking of suicidal ideology. I'm somehow revved up where the cognition is not the place that I really want to start. Now, where I do want to start is safety, and more specifically, I want to start by letting him know that I'm with you. Somehow letting him know that I'm present with them. And that's because they're so fragmented from themselves. They can't possibly make, that word diabolos, diabolical. Well, it's the ultimate diabolical action. I'm fragmented from friends, from people, from I'm even fragmented from my own body. I can't feel it. I'm going to harm it because I'm invisible, and there's nothing worse than being invisible. The only thing, there's nothing worse than pain, let's say, except for one thing: being invisible. I need to feel something. It's better than nothing. I'm so fragmented. I need to feel something. And now my feelings are all mixed up. So feeling pain is better than nothing. And by the way, so I want to be there. This is nothing new. Remember, where is there cutting in the Bible? We definitely want to know that. There's a really pretty specific reference to self-harm in the Bible in the New Testament.
Oh man, honestly, it's escaping me, Father. Please remind me.
It's funny, Michael, because we hear this pericope several times a year, probably more than any other gospel. The Gennesaret demoniac.
Oh, that's right.
He was in the tombs. He was, left there in the grave.
He threw himself into the fire often. That's right.
Fire.
Now
He
I
was
remember.
naked, threw himself into the fire, and even specifically, do you remember this detail? He was cutting himself against the stones.
Oh, wow.
So
that's right.
Cool. Now, what did the Lord himself, who is our teacher, our only teacher, what is the first thing he did? He didn't say, hey, you, what are you doing? What is the meaning of that? What are you doing that for? The Lord did not do that. The Lord, first of all, came to be present with him. I could imagine that they were in the boat, remember? And his disciples were cowering probably in the back of the boat. It's a crazy lunatic up there, Lord, But the Lord was going in front there. And he asked the man, what was the very first thing he asked the man was not, why are you doing this? He said, what is your name? Just being present with him. I'm Legion, which means, identifying that you're just full of demons and you're just, so the Lord just was able to be there with you. Who are you? You're a person. Who are you? Really, you who are so fragmented. So let's begin by breathing. And I want that story. I want that presence. I'll even share with you, try to do this quickly, but there is a dramatic story that I have here, Michael. I was working with a young man before, not so long ago. He was 16 years old, a pleasant young man. And he shared very frank with me. He was involved in pornography. I knew that much. He knew to draw. And so I was looking at, as I was getting to know him, and it was all through Zoom. Unfortunately, I wish I could have been able to do this through, in person, but it was during COVID. And he showed me, he said the one thing he liked to do was draw. And of course I wanted to see his drawings. And I noticed that his drawings looked a bit, they were mostly of people. They were all people figures, but they were somewhat deranged, and they looked cold, physically cold. They just had this sense of being cold and pale and so on and so forth. And I just asked him open-ended questions about what these things meant to me. The figures seemed cold. And eventually I learned that he liked fire because he himself was often cold. And I'd only met with him, I think, a handful of times or less. And I received a call from a psychologist that informed me that he was found by his parent. He was cutting himself. And anyway, and so of course I was aware of that. And when I talked to him, he said, you probably heard that I was cutting myself. And I just said, let's talk a little bit about that. And he began to tell me his stories. He said he might have heard. And it's, by the way, when I said, let's talk a little bit about that. In suicide, we think, don't feed him ideas. Don't let him think about suicide.
Right.
The research actually tells us that, we want people to think about these things in an appropriate way to process it. So for the purposes that I'm standing with you and I'm thinking out with you and I'm with you, it actually de-escalates that emotional energy that's got to, if I'm slowly with open-ended questions, not trying to get through it, not trying to get through this, but trying to get into it as far as we can get, and trying to help a person kind of, the research shows that that's what people need. They want to work through the voice of pain, the memories. And this young man, according to the psychologist, was actually hallucinating. So would I ask him that, and would I ask him the question, now I knew just before that session that he confided with me that he watches pornography. So I asked the question as a therapist, what type of pornography? And when I ask questions, people ask. By the way, the advantage of kind of having the therapeutic kind of, I have, this is a quick footnote, Michael, I have assessments that I ask people questions, and my experience is people answer these questions that it would take me maybe weeks and weeks to get to things that they're willing to answer on an assessment that's an appropriate assessment. Or even if they're in denial, the assessments can help that dialogue. We can kind of see that in an assessment. In this case, I had no assessment. I was just asked, so would I ask this young man about what kind of pornography was he watching? He told me he does not remember a time in his whole life, Michael, when he did not watch pornography. He was always around pornography. And what kind? Violent pornography. Now he was warming himself, remembering the fire. What are those voices? And I asked the question, I said, so voices. So gently I asked him this question. I said, are the voices, in a curious way, I said, do the voices scare you? That was the right question. He said, no, they don't scare him. I said, oh, you don't scare? Okay. So what do the voices do? And then he began with the most profane they deride him as a person. They don't scare him anymore because he's used to it, but you effing this and you this, you stupid idiot, you this, they deride him. And so that's what they do as long as he doesn't. And then he eventually told me this. He said, they make fun of Kosta. And he said it with a little bit of a smile. Now let's listen to this little detail, Michael. They make fun of Kosta, the voices that he's hearing. And I said, really? So tell me more about that. They make fun of Kosta. They laugh. Now they're not scaring him, but now they're making fun of Kosta. Could it be in some way, get the heck Kosta out of here? Yeah. He's getting a little too close. They make fun of him. How did the name Kosta? In other words, they're making fun of, he doesn't know Kosta. So we'll find something to make fun of. Just get him out of here. He's he's not important. Anything, as long as we can keep you an effing stupid idiot. Right. And that's when it struck me. You know what I'm thinking, Michael? I'm thinking I may have been most probably dealing with a young man who's just full of some sort of demons. You know, so I'm not saying that everybody who cuts himself or self-harms has that type of a dramatic, but again, what is dramatic? What is demons? People are we're self-harming our body. It's very important. It's a very important thing that we don't do that. And when we get to that point, something is happening that is diabolos. It's broken and divided. Yeah. So we want, and then our feelings are totally mistaken about that. Does that make a little sense, Michael?
It does, and it makes me actually think about something else. I wasn't planning on asking you this question in the interview, but just hearing you talk about self-harm, our spiritual advisor in the Antiochian Men is Father Hans Jacobsi, and he has used the term self-abuse for masturbation. And so self-harm, when you're cutting yourself, you're obviously doing your body harm. When I heard masturbation referred to as self-abuse, at first it was a bit of a surprise. I didn't think of it as self-harm when I first heard that term. And later on, when I researched the church fathers, I realized that more than one church father calls masturbation self-abuse. And so when you're talking about self-harm, and something that I think a lot of men can relate to, maybe without realizing they're harming themselves. I'm sure you come across this often. You mentioned pornography, and pornography is so prevalent in society, and our access to it is just so easy these days. How would you approach somebody who has a real addiction to masturbation? And do you approach it from the angle of someone who is self-harming?
Yeah, a sweet question and a vital question, Michael, because sometimes we don't even want to talk about that. But the best I can see, the church fathers did talk about that because, first of all, they're writing prescripts about that. There is canon law about it, of course,
Yeah.
it's very strict. And like all canon law, we need to kind of, have a guide to tell us what the meaning of that. The real meaning of that is you're taking your body and using it in a way that it is a form of self-harm.
Yeah.
But let's see how we can approach that, because people might not even know that it's self-harm. I may be doing that. It doesn't make me a bad guy. Just means
Right.
I need some help here.
Exactly.
So sometimes things feel good and they don't realize the pain involved in it. Remember that self-harm?
Mhm.
I have actually done studies on self-harm and why people do it. There's actually a lot of answers. I just gave you one because I can't feel anything. I better to feel something, right? There's a number of answers. And I've actually asked people why do that. I get to the point where eventually I do ask them why they self-harm. And one of the answers is it feels good.
Mm.
How can that feel good? But in my mind, it feels sometimes something that is devastating can feel good. It's very possible, and I need to know that. There's a saying: victims of violence and sexual abuse who experience a fusion of pleasure, of pain, and of shame, or they're sometimes unable to distinguish fear from sexual enmeshment.
Mm.
This is the inside of psychology. You can't distinguish between fear and sexual, and it's pleasureful, but it's fearful. We could actually say a lot about that, and it'd definitely be worth a separate discussion. But fear can be enmeshed and entangled and connected with pleasure, and that's why anything can happen sexually, including anything. We won't even get into it. Gross things can be connected as a habit.
Yeah.
Or things that are illegal, or whatever it is, or things that people would be totally embarrassed if people knew. But this becomes part of our connection here. Okay.
Mm.
So what we want to know is that our feelings and emotions can get really mixed up. So I might think that I'm, again, addictions, generally we do it because it feels good until it doesn't.
Right.
So it feels good until it doesn't. And then but if my mind is already entrenched in something, the part I remember is that, right now I need that again, I need that again, I need that hit again, I need that drug again, or whatever it is, I need that experience again. Because the nature of addictions, when it really becomes a certain level of, let's say, compulsive addictions, there's levels of it. So we think of a continuum. But the nature of it is that it doesn't work in the moment. In the moment, my brain is just not able to withstand the chemicals that I've attached myself to. And what I need is that feeling. And so the self-harm is very real. And by the way, speaking of masturbation, it's just like pornography. This is not a joke, because people can watch that. Let's just say the amount of time we spend on it. It's not unusual for people to say, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour. Stop me when you think I'm done, Michael. 4 hour, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yes, this happens. Not that most or everybody does that. I don't spend 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
How much time do you spend? How much time does it preoccupy your mind? How much time is involved in that? And very often the skin, the body, is actually harmed by that frequency. But that's the physical harm.
Yeah.
So then there's the reality. So what I would want to say is, ask the question, like all things, like with the cut self-harm and other fields or in other things, addictions, my starting point is to stand with the person.
Mm.
If a person is masturbating, that becomes which is, we can say that's natural, but what's truly natural is it's really wonderful for a man to have an ability to go beyond his nature for something greater. We need to know what the why is, by the way. We need to know why we're being chaste and vigilant and doing things according to the proper time and order. But if I'm just kind of, alone and working, so I would want to know for a person, I would want to be able to stand with them and see if we can talk it out a little bit. I'm not going to just come and and correct anybody, because I want to see if they want correction. I don't want to, maybe the only correction I can offer them is to stand in curiosity. But people do find themselves in trouble. And I would add, once I can establish a relationship, then I'm going to ask questions such as, let's think this out. And as a therapist, I can do this. Again, not everybody can do this, but I will ask people, how frequently do you masturbate? See, it's a sensitive question, but when we ask people that, it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
maybe a very lot, or else when did it become there really is an issue? I'm drawing it out just by there. So I'm asking this vital question. What is it doing for you? That's the key question.
Yeah.
Now again, like any question, if it's not asked with a spirit of love and intention, just, well, what's that doing for you, is probably not a good way to ask it. But if I can say, tell me, think that out, that happens to a lot of people. What does it mean for you? What do you feel like you get out of it? And
Okay.
then I'm going to be very quick to do this, to not give my correction to his answer or her answer. Is the same. It's not Mel's, it's both, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to really likely milk it, ask more questions, ask more. So what I'm hearing you say is that what you get out of this is you just have that just is a relief that you need. And I'm going to just play that lead. And it feels like that's the only, right now, it feels like that's the only relief you can get. And eventually I'm going to ask them other questions. Is there another part of you that has another feeling about that? Because very often it is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have necessarily meant it. They feel guilty. They feel anxious. It doesn't really solve the anxiety except for that moment. So
Yeah.
could we give a little attention to that part of it where you feel like, I would begin with the part that they're passionate about. I want that relief. I want that feeling. I want to hear more about that. I want that part to be heard. And then I'm going to ask other questions like, could we give a little attention to the other part that feels like you feel a little anxious about that as well? Or you feel mom or dad doesn't like you because of that, or let's give a little attention. I'm just drawing that out also. So we say in modern psychology, we call this sometimes parts work. And you know what my answer to that is, Michael? Parts work can be really helpful. It reminds me of the real parts work. Again, it's like most of these things, it's in scripture, because St. Paul speaks about the very thing I don't want to do, I do it. I'm mad and it's enslaving me. So there's part of you, Paul, what I'm hearing is part of you is doing the very thing you don't want to do, but you don't want to do it. Let's talk about that part also.
Yeah.
So it becomes a dialogue where innately, because we're created in the image and likeness of God, there is something in us that is a better, an uncontaminated resource, that if we can, together with the helper, draw that out, then that's what we want. We don't want to be the parent who's forcing their teenager to understand things as much as the parent who is curiously helping the teenager to think things out themselves. But that works best and effectively in adulthood also.
Yeah. Father, as I was listening to you talk about these really sensitive topics and things that affect very real people, I can't help but think about the fact that our actions, our sins affect other people, particularly if the person that comes to you is married or if they have children. One of the, I guess, hardest realities that people learn is that our decisions and our actions affect other people, and most often the people that are closest to us, and sometimes in very negative ways, unfortunately. So I'm just curious about, when you're working with people, at what point do you need to go to a spouse? At what point do you have to think about the children that are involved with this person that's telling you about whatever kind of self-harm, self-abuse, or whatever they're doing?
Yeah, that's a really superb question, Michael, because let's take the topic we were just talking about, masturbation.
Yeah.
First of all, I can't resist this footnote. Please send me the links. I would love to hear. I love Father Ask Father Hans is superb, and I would love to pick up and see what he said, and perhaps we can even do another discussion about that at some point.
Yeah, we'll even put the link to that video in the description of this one, but I'll definitely send that to you. And I recommend anybody watching this take a look at those videos.
Yeah, and then there's much more to say. Actually, that would be an interesting topic to kind of give some examples from some actual events and sort of say case studies, people studies of how people think that subject out and how that can be brought about. So really great topic. But let's think of it this way: if I have a compulsive behavior, any compulsive behavior, And I don't realize, I'm not necessarily in tune to how that's affecting other people. But what happens when I'm used to something and then I do have another person in my life? Does that just kind of poof, shut down? So at what point, the sooner the better, but we can't just, we have to, here, let me give you this anecdote to answer your question, how I feel about that, Michael. And then it becomes a question of how to help people to understand that. I remember years ago, I had a young couple that I had done a little bit of pre-marriage work with, but for some reason, I don't believe I did too much as I would normally want to do. But they came to me before the wedding. And this man was a middle-aged couple. It was not a young couple, and this was way back then. But the man told me the day before his wedding, is the opportunity. I think it was, they were out of town or something, but the day before his wedding, they each came to me for confession. It's actually a beautiful couple. I like them very much. But the man came to share with me that he typically, he was describing how daily, regularly, weekly, he would entertain women, take them out to dinner, and then sleep with them. So he even said, over the course of years now, thousands of women over the course of a number of years that he typically. And when we were at the wedding reception, after the wedding, we're now at the wedding, and when I was sitting next to him, just the two of us at some point, and he actually looked there, and I said, "This is a nice place." And he actually told me, and I don't think he meant this with a mean bone, Michael, but he turned to me and he said, "This is one of the places that I used to take women." And I'm thinking, oh, on your wedding day, so number one, does your now wife or day before wife, does she even know these things? And the real point is, who are you going to be thinking about on your wedding night? Who is that poor man going to be thinking about on his wedding night? It's not going to be just his new wife, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that simple, because even if he's thinking about her, his experience is still based upon other kinds of relationship, namely ones that are not permanent, namely relationships that are one night stands. And this is what he's used to. Is that going to affect him? So I think that when we think about affecting other people, I would like to, talk to teenagers, as I have many times, to help them to think out that the choices we're making today, does it just, again, I'll ask it as a question, do the choices that we have today have anything to do with the people you're going to be knowing and associating with later? That's a good question their parent could ask a teenager. Will it affect the way you have relations? Here's another question I ask teachers. I ask teenagers, do you think you'll ever get married? That's a good question. I'm afraid the answer that I get over the years has changed. There's a lot of, I don't know, well, if you do get married, what age do you think you'll get married, or whatever it is? Just the question is a good one, though, because it's one thing to think, to sort of decide that I'm not getting married from a young age. And for what reason? There may be a good reason. There is the eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven, but because I somehow find it easier not to, because I've decided not to, that I'm not even thinking and envisioning marriage. And why would I envision marriage? Why should I think about it? Look at the examples I have. That's another topic. But just asking, that's actually a very important topic. Where do we learn good relationships? I have a whole kind of a thing on that, because most people on a scale of 1 to 10 will relate the best examples that they see as a good relationship, a good marriage, are not so high. They're more under 5 than over 5. Yeah. So why would I think to get married? But to ask, just the question is a good one. Just the question, say, what type of relationship would you have? Just the question is a good one. Even if the answer is not a good one, I'm thinking and curious about it, to ask people to kind of think about it. And if I can do that with a group of people, my experience, Michael, is that within that group, and this is why it's so important to meet with a group, because some of the answers that are, probably not very mature, or probably maybe even giddyish, or just really, other answers are going to come about that are probably going to be more mature and more, and if people are thinking that out together, it's just a good thing. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. Yeah, Father, that makes a lot of sense. I was hoping you would talk a little bit, though, about your recent experience with us in the diocese. You You recently gave a couple of retreat talks with us in our virtual retreats that we have in the Diocese of Miami Southeast. One of them was on sexual addiction. And I have to say, I got a lot out of that session. The material that you presented was very honest. It was very important. It was relevant to, I think, if not everybody watching, somebody that they knew or that they're friends with. I think just understanding what comes behind that, it was so helpful to me, especially to hear it from an Orthodox perspective. And it's something that in our culture right now, we are in such a sexualized culture as it is, that a lot of people are having a really hard time with it. But just thinking forward, we have a parish life conference that's virtual this year in the Diocese of Miami in the Southeast, and you're scheduled to be a guest speaker at one of our Antiochian Men events. Would you give us maybe a sneak peek as well on what you plan to talk about to the men of our diocese, and what your experience has been like in doing these talks with us so far?
You know, thank you, Michael, because the topic of addiction is, in general, first of all, is it's the most fascinating topic, because it's a megaphone, it's a mega lens of how life is and the dynamics of what's going on in life.
Yeah.
If I can look through a megaphone, I kind of need that in my life. I can't always tell the dynamics, but wow, I learned so much by thinking of addictions. That's why I really should, if I'm not addicted, but people around me are. So I'm going to learn something about addictions. And when I can get into that conversation, it's really about what I'm learning about myself. You know, sometimes people say, gee, you're talking about you work as sexual addictions, and you're hearing the most awful and painful stories, very painful. How could you do that? Well, we have to remember why we're doing that. And we remember I don't find it discouraging. I find it extremely exhilarating and motivating. I have to tell you the truth, and I'm not the only therapist that feels that way. There's no need for burnout. Now there is a need to be careful about burnout, but there's no need for burnout, because I'm listening to pain, and it's making me wonder about suffering, and it's reminding me of Christ's presence in suffering. And so to speak of addictions is to speak about the ills and the corruption of relationships. But it also reminds me of again the beautiful restoration and the healing presence of how Christ, the bridegroom, treats his bride. I never let go of that. It's not just for Holy Week that we recently finished, right? We're always remembering the cross. You know, one of my favorite teachers once said that if nothing else, a priest every day, and I think he meant more than, just look at the cross. Don't even say anything. Just look at the cross every day. You can even do that at night, in bed. Just look at the cross, even without light. Just look at the cross, and that's our perspective. So these things are about understanding life itself, and ultimately about understanding myself, which we want to understand thyself. We do it in conjunction with these things. So when I received the phone call from Siedna to offer a talk, Michael, it was recently that I moved to North Carolina into the Diocese of the South, and receiving a call from the good bishop, there's not even any words. It wasn't just, you know, it was a personal phone call where he asked me about myself, and it made me feel like I'm wanted. It made me feel connected. Even if I would have said no, of course I was excited and thrilled, but he's asking me to be part of the group. Boy, was that exciting. And this is the spirit and the sense that I get from, and not just Siedna, but the Amen group offers that background. I just a one sentence kind of anecdote here, Michael. I always remember this. I love this. You know, two draft horses that are big, heavy horses. Two draft horses together. They can pull a lot of weight, 8,000 pounds. These big horses, right? But together they do not. If you tie them up together to pull weight, they do not pull double the weight from 8,000 to 12,000. No. Instead, they pull 3 times the weight because they're combined together. And this is what happens when we need. It's not a, you know, she had asked me, would I speak to the men? I need to speak to the men because I need to see faces. I need to be with people. Of course, that's what it was for my experience, Michael.
And what do you plan to talk about upcoming here with the virtual Parish Life Conference? Can you give us maybe a little bit of a sneak peek?
I will. So I will answer this also by a little anecdote if I can. there was a group of students from school who visited the Denver Mint. You know, there's only so many mints in the country that make money. And as this group of, like a tour to see how they make money, and fascinating trip. I was not on the trip, but I actually missed out on the trip. But I heard about it in this way, that the question came up, the professionals who work there were, knew all about the process of making money and so forth. And the question is, how do you know the fake money? How can you tell it's fake money? And I love the answer of this. How do you know it's fake money? There's a lot of, how do you do that? And his answer, this wise tour leader, he said, we study the real money, the authentic money.
Mm.
And once we have a sense of the authentic money, the fake money is a lot easier to spot.
Right.
So I like that. So when we're talking about the theme of relationships, sobriety, well, where's the even masturbation? Don't masturbate, because physically it can really harm your body, which it can. Psychologically, we can make you feel really guilty. Spiritually, it can really impact your relationships. All that's true. However, where's the life, as Father Schmemann would say, where's the life of life? Where's the positive? Where's the life-giving sense of relationships? Where is the healthy sexuality? Or I think what we would say as Orthodox Christians is, it's a kind of big theme, healthy sexuality. Where is sanctified sexuality?
Mm.
Where is noble sexuality? Where is noble relationships? And so I want to spend time looking at that. And if I may, maybe I'll even end with yet a further brief anecdote that'll sum this up for me in that regard. And it's another broom story. I began with a broom story in Tijuana, Mexico, Michael, and I'm going to end with another broom story, if I can, to make full circle. Okay.
Okay.
This is not when I was a little kid. This is when I was now graduated the seminary, and my wife, we had been married then. We married just before I started grad school, and we had planned a long-standing trip. I wanted to go to Greece. I'd never been. My wife had gone a couple times before to Europe, but I had never been. And we saved money. We just tried. I just want to go. I want to go to Mount Athos. So we made it. It was a whole lot to say about that. Quite a trip, of course. But I remember in this one monastery that I visited, and I don't even, the name, which one slipped me, but I was there for about 2 weeks. And we stayed, and I came to this one prominent, well-known, large monastery. And when I pulled up in the afternoon time, it was a pretty large monastery, but there was not a lot of noise and activity at the time. It was more quiet, except there was a monk on the porch who was a younger monk, one of the younger monks that I've ever seen. I mean, he looked like almost a teenager. He was pretty young looking, but he was doing an activity. He was sweeping the porch, but he wasn't just sweeping the porch. He was sweeping the porch with an incredible, just life to him. He looked like he was vibrant. I don't know if he was reading the Psalms as he was sweeping, but he just had this peaceful, joyful, alive look as he was sweeping the porch. And I had planned to be there for a while. So, after I put my bags, I came up to him and I asked him, I says, Borona Kanomia Diakonia, can I do a little bit of a deacon, some sort of a service? And at first he looked at me kind of like, it's okay. But I asked him a second time, and he saw that I really wanted to help. And he looked at me like that, and he handed me the broom. And what he said to me was this simple, after long kind of anecdote, but what he said to me was this simple when I took the broom. He said, "Non evloi meno." And it's not just what he said, it's out. He said, he gave me the broom, "Non evloi meno." In other words, "Non evloi meno" means, may it be blessed. You're going to sweep the floor. Well, you're not just sweeping the floor. Anybody can do that. May it be blessed. You're going to sweep the floor to make our monastery our home. And the way he said that, it made me feel like, whoa, I've got to sweep this floor like it's heaven,
Yeah.
That was the attitude. What if we approached relationships? Where's the excitement? Where's the joy? We tell addicts, speaking of sexual addicts, Michael, sometimes what needs to happen, or the best understood kind of experience from somebody who's really intoxicated with sexual acting out, is there's got to be a 90-day sobriety kind of principle. Okay. but gee, that's a really impossible thing from everything, including masturbation. I mean, that's, you could discuss that, but that seems impossible. That seems impossible. It does seem impossible, and it probably is impossible unless there's, like everything else, there's that community support.
Mm.
I mean, how many of us went to Holy Week and up at night, or Pascha night, you're up at night? Who gets up and worships that time of night? Except we do, because it's supported. There's a community support.
Right.
Where those monks who were up, 3, 4 in the morning, okay, the routine is that, but how can you get up and do that? Because of the community support that's behind that.
Mm.
So the impossibility becomes possible when there's community, and that I know is the purpose of Amen.
Yeah.
Right, Michael? We can't do it alone, but with other people, we don't even understand what we don't understand. But once we're in a group of people, it's like diabetes. Suppose I had diabetes and I don't even, I go to the bathroom all night long. I'm urinating, and once I learned that I have diabetes, now it makes sense. It takes away some of the shame, and I get some support. All the difference in the world. So where is the excitement about relationships that we're not going to figure that out alone?
Yeah.
Where is the excitement and the possibility and the support of how relationships can really be, instead of merely surviving or merely don't masturbate? That's like saying the goal is to be sober. I'll just tell you now without getting into it, but the goal is not merely to be sober, Michael. All right. Teenagers who are at a restaurant, if any parents are listening, I used to ask parents, I say, go to a restaurant and order some food with your family. And when the waiter or the waitress comes by and they say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm going to be taking care of you. How you guys doing today? And I ask teenagers this question too. Turn to say, who answers that question? Hi, how are you guys today? Dad and mom, man, you were good. How you doing? Kids, they don't say anything. And I get it. It's kind of, one teenager, they're just there they're just asking that question because they got to do it. But they ask the question, how are you today? And they're not even important enough for you to look at them. You're waiting for mom and dad to see. So that teenager is not intoxicated. They're not drunk. They're not addicted. They're not a sex addict, but they're not really connecting to the person right in front of them. They really want to tackle life and make them but life right in front of them, they're disconnected from life right in front of them. Just to say hi. It's a person, it's a human being. He's doing his job. He's trying, he's tired. He's a waiter on his feet all day, but I'm not connecting to that. But I'm going to study life and see where I want to go for college. How about studying the table and saying hello to life around you? So he's sober, but is he healthy?
Yeah.
Just picking on teenagers right now. I'm assuming they're not going to listen too much to bother me. So does that answer your question, Michael? I'm sorry.
It does. Yeah. No, that's great. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're going to talk to us and the men in our diocese about at the Virtual Parish Life Conference. And if I can do just one shameless plug, registration is open for the Virtual Parish Life Conference. So if you are in our diocese and you haven't registered yet, please do so. It has been sent out on an email. If you're not on the diocese email list and you're watching this video right now, please send an email to DOMSE, which is DOMSE @gmail.com. Just send us an email. Let us know you want to be added to the email list. It will go to our DMC board and we will get you added so we can send you that registration link. And again, I can't wait to hear what you have to say, Father Kosta. It's always very edifying, educational, and helpful whenever you talk to us. And we really appreciate you being willing to do that.
Thank you, Michael. Christ is risen.
Truly, he is risen. Father Kosta, thank you very much for your time today. I can't wait again to talk to you again. There's a few questions we didn't get to today, so maybe we can do a part 2 interview sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, to all Antiochian men out there, remember to check out the many videos we have available on our Amen YouTube channel. Please also check out our website at antiochianmen.org. As a reminder, you can see all our videos on that website. And please join us in the Band app if you haven't already. We have 2 groups. We have a Band of Brothers group for virtual fellowship and also an Amen Reading Corner group where we share daily readings, prayers, quotes from the church fathers, and the saint of the day. We'll include the links to both of those groups in the description of this video. And remember to please subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. And once again, Father Kosta, thank you so much for your time today.
Prepare for the ways of salvation. O Theotokos, for I have profaned my whole life with procrastination. But by thine intercessions, purify thou